This is Navy Vet 82. I'm going to continue the amendments, and we'll start with Amendment 11. You can see it on the screen there. The judicial power of the United States shall not be construed to extend to any suit in law or equity, comments, or prosecuted against one of the United States by citizens of another state or by citizens or subject of any foreign state. Okay. In 1793, the Supreme Court ruled that it had the right to hear a suit brought by two cities of South Carolina against the state of Georgia. Many members of Congress and of the state legislators vigorously criticized the court's ruling, claiming that the federal courts had no business interfering in sovereign immunity of the state courts. The 11th Amendment serves to the individual states that the right to hear cases brought against them either by citizens or of another state or another country, as is the case with many of the amendments to the Constitution. The Supreme Court has ruled that there are exceptions to this general rule. For example, since 1824, the Supreme Court has held that state government officials are not immune from being sued in federal court if they act in violation of the rights guaranteed by the Constitution. Electors shall meet in their respective states. Amendment 12, the electors shall meet in the respective states and vote by ballot for the president and vice president, one of whom at least shall not be an inhabitant of the same state with themselves. They shall name in their ballots the person voted for as president, and in the district ballots the person voted for as vice president. And they shall make distinct list of all persons voted for the as president and all persons voted for as vice president, and of the number of votes for each, which list they shall sign and certify and transmit sealed to the seat of the government of the United States, directed to the President of the Senate. The President of the Senate, in the presence of the Senate and House of Representatives, open all the certificates, and the votes shall then be counted. The person having the greatest number of votes for the president shall be president if such a number be a majority of the whole number of electors appointed, and if no person has such majority, then from the persons having the highest number, not exceeding 3 on the list of those voted as for president of the House of Representatives, shall choose immediately by ballot the president, but in choosing the president, the votes shall be taken by states, the representatives from each state having 1 vote. A quorum for this purpose shall consist of a member or members from 2/3 of the states, and a majority of all the states shall be necessary to a choice. Okay. And in the House of Representatives, of choice shall be devolve upon them. Therefore, the 4th day of the March, the next following. Wow. Then the vice president shall act as president as in the case of the death or other constitutional disabilities of the president. The person having the greatest number of votes as the vice president shall be the vice president in such a manner, in such a number, be a majority of the whole number of electors appointed, and if no person shall have the majority, then from the two highest numbers on the list, Senate shall choose the vice president. A quorum of for purposes shall consist of 2/3 of the whole number of senators, and the majority of the whole number of shall be necessary to consider a choice, but no person constitutionally ineligible to the office of president shall be eligible to the vice president of the United States. When the framers of the Constitution devised this complicated process by which presidential electors would select the nation's president and vice president, they assumed that those electors would run for their office as an individual, and that the voters would select them on the basis of their individual merits. In that original notion of the way that the electoral system would work, it was expected that the electorals would each cast two ballots with no distinction between a president and vice president ballot, and that the person receiving the greatest number of votes would be elected president, and the person receiving the next largest number would be voted vice president. The framers of the Constitution did not anticipate the emergence of an organized political party system in which two extra constitutional political parties, Federalists and Jefferson's Republicans, would organize the electors, or in some states of electorals pledged in advance to vote for president and vice presidential candidates as part of their party ticket. In the elections of 1800, the party ticket of Thomas Jefferson, the person whom the Republicans intended as the presidential candidate, and Aaron Burr, the person whom the Republicans intended as their vice presidential candidate, received a majority of the electoral votes. In fact, though, party discipline was so great that the electors cast their votes on their two ballots in such a way that Jefferson and Burr had equal number of votes, and no constitutional mechanism for deciding which of the candidates was intended to be the presidential candidate and which one was vice presidential candidate. As a consequence, the election was thrown into a House of Representatives, where after a great deal of intrigue, Jefferson was selected as president and Burr was the vice president. The adoption of the 12th Amendment was a necessary adjustment to the way in which the American party system and transformed America's presidential elections, although the provisions of the 12th Amendment are as mind-numbing complicated as the original provision of Article 2, Section 1, and the essential feature of the amendment was that henceforth electors should vote separately for the president and vice president, and while the original language In Article 2, Section 1 stipulated that the House of Representatives would choose among the 5 leading candidates should no one receive a majority of the electoral votes. The provision in the 12th Amendment narrowed the choice to the top 3 candidates. Amendment 13. Amendment 12 was ratified on June 15th, 1804, December 6th, 1865, sorry. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for a crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. Section 2, Congress shall have the power to enforce this article by appropriate legislator. The 13th Amendment narrow passed Congress on January 31st, 1865, in the closing months of the Civil War. It was ratified in December of 1865 after the South had formally accepted the defeat. It marked the first important steps in bringing American constitutional practice into harmony with the American libertarian values, although there had been previous private attempts to eliminate slavery, usually accompanied by a promise of compensation for the slaves. The 13th Amendment unequivocally abolished slavery, provided for the immediate emancipation of all slaves in the United States without compensation to their owners. It also gave to Congress the power to enforce the emancipation of slaves, a power that is exercised in the Civil Rights Act of 1866. Okay, that was a short one, actually. Amendment 14, Section 1 was ratified in 1868. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. No state shall make or enforce any law shall abridge the privilege of immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, without due process of law, nor deny any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the law. Section 2. Representatives shall be appointed among several states according to their respective number, counting the whole number of persons in each state, excluding Indians not taxed. But when the right to vote to any election for the choice of electors, the President of the and Vice President of the United States, representatives in Congress, and the executive and judicial officers of a state, or the members of the legislature, therefore, is denied to any of the male inhabitants of such a state being 21 years of age and citizen of the United States, or in any abridged except for participation in rebellion or other crimes on the basis of representation therein shall be reduced in the proportion which the number of such male citizens shall bear to the whole number of the male citizenry 21 years of age in such states. Wow. Section 3. No person shall be a senator or representative of Congress or elector in the president or vice president or hold any office, civil or military, under the United States or under any state who have previously taken an oath as a member of Congress, as an officer of the United States, or as a member of the state legislature, or as an executive or judicial officer of any state, to support the Constitution of the United States shall now have engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the same, or given aid or comfort to the enemies thereof, but Congress may be a vote of 2/3 of the House removes such disabilities. Section 4. This is still Amendment 14. Okay, that's to read it. Section 4. The validity of the public debt of the United States authorized by law, including debts incurred from payment of pensions and bounties for services in suppressing insurrection or rebellion, shall not be questioned, but neither the United States nor any state shall assume or pay debt or obligation incurred in aid of insurrection or rebellion against the United States, or any claim for the loss of emancipation of any slaves, but all such debts, obligations, and claims shall be held illegal and void. Section 5, which happens to be the last one. Okay. The Congress shall have power to enforce by appropriate legislation the provisions of this article. Okay, this is the explanation. Perhaps the most significant and far-reaching amendment to the Constitution, 14th Amendment, is viewed by many scholars and jurists as the provision of the Constitution that has brought the principles enunciated in the preamble of the Declaration of Independence into the realm of the constitutional law. The words of the preamble of the declarations that all men are created equal and they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, are dearly exhortatory. Exhortatory. They were important rhetorically in defining the American purpose as they declared the colonies independence from Great Britain, but they did not have the force of law. At the heart of the 14th Amendment is the stipulation that all Americans born or naturalized in the United States, including the newly freed slaves or citizens of the United States, and there is no state may make or enforce any law that shall infringe on the rights of the American citizens, including those unalienable rights of the life, liberty, or property, without due process of law. The 14th Amendment's promise to all persons are guaranteed equal protection of the laws would prove to an important mechanism by which the Supreme Court, in a series of rulings of the 20th century, would articulate a uniform standard by which many of the rights spelled out in the Bill of Rights would be guaranteed to all citizens in each of the states. Section 2, the 14th Amendment had more specific intent. It effectively repealed the 3/5 promise by which slaves were counted as 3/5 of a person in the apportionments of the representation of taxation and stipulates that any state that attempts to deny the rights to vote of any male United States citizen over the age of 21 will have its representation in the Congress and Electoral College reduced proportionally to the number of citizens so disenfranchised. The part of the section 2, which was clearly intended by the members of Congress who drafted it, was a table that only exception to protection of the rights to vote is in the case of individuals who have participated in a rebellion or other crime. And this exception not only applied or to convicted criminals who are still denied the right to vote in most states, but also to a large number of Americans who had participated in the Southern Rebellion during the Civil War. Section 3, the amendment explicitly excludes former Southern rebels for serving in any federal or state office until Congress by 2/3 removed that prohibition. The constitutional device effective turned over control of the reconstruction of the former secessionist states to an individual who had remained loyal to the Union during the Civil War. Section 4, the amendment absolves the federal government of any responsibility from debts incurred by the Southern states or by the Confederacy during the Civil War. Finally, Section 5 granted Congress the broad authority to proceed with the legislation that would enforce the provision of the 14th Amendment in immediate aftermath of the adoption of the amendment. Congress shall pass 7 statutes aimed at guaranteeing civil rights into the freed slaves, as well as imposing conditions of readmission to the Union on the states that had succeeded. Over the course of the next 2 decades, many of the provisions of the statutes would be ruled unconstitutional by the Supreme Court, which adopted an increasingly narrow representative of the rights guaranteed by the 14th Amendment. Amendment 15, Section 1, the rights of the United States, the rights of the United States, citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, previous condition of servitude. Section 2, the Congress shall have the power to enforce this article by appropriate legislation. While the 14th Amendment punishes states that deprive newly freed slaves of the rights to vote by reducing their representation in the House of Representatives, the 15th Amendment categorically prohibits the denial of the rights to vote on any race, color, or provision conditions of servitude. Notably, the amendment does not mention gender, which, to the dismay of advocates of women's suffrage, meant although newly freed male slaves were guaranteed the right to vote, women of all races were denied the right to vote in spite of the adoption of the 15th Amendment. The states of the former Confederacy managed to find ways to continue to drastically curtail the rights of the African Americans to vote. Although the use of the poll tax, literacy test, and the other discriminatory devices, it was not until the passage of the Voters' Rights Act of 1965 the African Americans have had equal access to the polling places. Article 16, Congress shall have power to lay out the collective taxes on incomes from whatever source derived without apportionment among the several states, and without regard to any census or enumeration. Although the original version of the Constitution gave Congress the power to levy taxes, such taxation was only to be levied on the states themselves in direct proportion to their population. Although Congress during the Civil War was able to levy a direct tax on individuals as part of the wartime measure, the Supreme Court in 1895 ruling, Pollock versus Farmer Loan and Trust Company, ruled that taxing the property of the individuals was unconstitutional. The 16th Amendment effectively reversed that ruling. It is silent on what the race of the taxation might be. For example, it does not speak to whether the individual should be taxed at an equal rate or whatever the rate of the taxation should be progressively higher on higher income. Congress, which enacted the federal income tax law in October 1913, just 7 months after the passage of the 16th Amendment, adopted for the modestly progressive tax, the rate of taxation imposed on the top taxation bracket has been verified from 7% in 1913 to a high 92% in 1952 to 53. The current rate of taxation in the top bracket is 38.6%, near the low end of the continuum. Amendment 17. Amendment 17, ratified in 1913, the Senate of the United States shall be composed of 2 senators from each state elected by the people thereof for 6 years, and each senator shall have 1 vote to electors in each state shall have the qualification requisite for electors of the most numerous branch of the state legislature. When vacancies happen in the representation of any state in the Senate, the executive authority of such state shall issue writs of election to fill such vacancies, provided the legislator of any state may empower the executive thereof to make temporary appointments until the people fill the vacancy by election, as the legislator may direct. The amendment shall not be so constructed as to affect the election or term of the Senate, any senator chosen before it becomes valid as part of the Constitution. When the Constitution was first drafted, the framers believed that the Senate, the upper house, should be a repository of superior wisdom and virtue, and towards that end stipulate that senators shall be elected by the legislators of each of the states, whose members would presumably be able to make a wiser choice than the people at large. As one of a serious and reforms during the progressive ERA, Congress imposed and the states endorsed an amendment calling for direct popular election of senators. Amendment 18 was ratified in 1919, January 16, 1990, repealed by the 21st December 5th, 1933. Okay. The 18th Amendment, Section 1, after 1 year from the ratification of this article, the manufacture, sale, or transportation of intoxicating liquors within the importation thereof into or the exportation thereof from the United States and all territories subject to the jurisdiction thereof for beverages purposes is hereby prohibited. The Congress, Section 2, the Congress of several states shall have concurrent powers to enforce the article by appropriate legislation. Section 3, the article shall be inoperative unless it shall have been ratified as an amendment to the Constitution by the legislators of several states as provided in the Constitution, wherein within 7 years of the date of the submission thereof to the states by the Congress. And the description of this is most of the amendments to the Constitution seek to grant specific rights of the people by placing restraints on sections of the government. 18th Amendment is the only amendment that has sought to restrict the rights of the people. In this case, the rights to manufacture, sell, and transport intoxicating liquors within the United States. Interestingly, it does not prevent the consumption of liquor, though liquor consumption declined marked during the years when the amendment was in force. It certainly did not cease. Indeed, as people turned to illegal sources for their alcoholic beverages, the operation of the 18th Amendment served to encourage otherwise law-abiding people to break the law and bolster activities of organized crime. Amendment 19. The rights of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on the account of sex. Congress shall have the power to enforce the article by appropriate legislator. The 19th Amendment synopsis or explanation. The 19th Amendment was the culmination of more than 3/4 of a century of dedicated work by advocates for female suffrage. Although some states had passed legislation allowing women the right to vote prior to 1920, the right was not extended to all women until the adoption of the 19th Amendment. Unlike the operation of the 15th Amendment, which was thwarted by states that found ways to continue to deny the voters the vote to African Americans. The amendment granting women the right to vote encountered little resistance in the aftermath of its passage. Amendment 20, Section 1, the term of President and Vice President shall end at noon on the 20th day of January, and the terms of the senators and representatives at noon on the 3rd day of January. The years in which such terms would have ended if this article had not been ratified, and the terms for their successors shall then begin. Section 2. Congress shall assemble at least once every year, and such meeting shall begin at noon on the 3rd day of January, unless they shall by law appoint a different day. Section 3. If at the time fixed for beginning of the term of the president shall have died, the vice president elect shall become the president. If the president shall not have been chosen before the time fixed for the beginning of his term, or if the president-elect shall have failed to qualify, then the vice president shall act as president until a president shall have qualified, and Congress may by law provide for any case wherein neither president-elect nor vice president-elect shall have qualified, declaring who shall then act as president, or in the manner in which one of who is to act by selected. Such person shall act accordingly until the president or vice president shall not have qualified. Okay, Section 4. The Congress may be law provide for the case of the death of any person for whom the House of Representatives may choose a president, wherever the right of choice shall have devolved upon them, and for the case of the death of any person from whom the Senate may choose a vice president, whenever the right of choice shall have devolved upon them. Section 5. Sections 1 and 2 shall take effect on the 15th day of October following the ratification of this article. Section 6. The article shall be inoperative unless it shall have been ratified as an amendment to the Constitution by the legislators and 3/4 of the several states within 7 years from the date of its submission. Many of the most consequential amendments to the Constitution, i.e. the first 10, are remarkably brief, while some of the more arcane amendments seem to require more elaborate verbiage, and this is certainly the case with the 20th Amendment. Traditionally, the new president took office in March, created a significant time gap between their election in November and their inauguration. In some cases, at this time lag had seriously consequences. For example, during the period between Abraham Lincoln election and inauguration, his Democratic predecessor, James Buchanan, found himself to be a lame duck president at a time when Southern states were seceding from the Union in recognition of improvements in communications and transportation since the Constitution was originally adopted. The 20th Amendment reduced the amount of time passage elapsed between the presidential election and his inauguration. It also moved the meeting time of newly elected Congress from March to January 3rd, preventing the meeting of a lame duck session Congress, whose actions might not be consonant with the will of the electorate as expressed in November elections. The remaining parts of the 20th Amendment seek to clarify the role of Congress in determining a plan of succession in case of death or removal of both of the president and vice president. For much of the 19th century, Congress designated the president pro tempore of the Senate as the next line of succession. From 1880s to 1947, Congress stipulated that the Secretary of State would be next in line. The decision to change the law provided from the Speaker of the House to assume office in case of the President or Vice President absent shall by the desire to have popular elected offices. In these cases, the leader of the legislative branch, most directly responsible to the people, assumed the presidency. Amendment 21. Oh, these are going fast. Section 1, the 18th Amendment, Article of Amendment, the 18th Article of the Amendment to the Constitution of the United States is hereby repealed. Section 2, the transportation or importation into any state, territory, or possession of the United States for delivery or use therein of intoxicating liquors in violation of the law thereof is hereby prohibited. Section 3. The article shall be appropriate unless it shall have been ratified as an amendment to the Constitution by convention in the several states as provided in the Constitution within 7 years of the date of the submission thereof the state to the state of Congress, the states of Congress. Just as the 18th Amendment is only constitutionally amendment to restrict the rights of American people, the 21st Amendment, which ended prohibition, is the only amendment in the Constitution to repeal the previous amendment. The 21st Amendment does not specifically allow for any manufacture, transportation, or sale of liquors rather returns to states the right to regulate the alcohol distribution consumption. This amendment is unusual in that it specifies the state convention rather than state legislators should be bodies responsible for ratifying the amendment. Oh shoot, I forgot to scroll up. And that's that article right there. Amendment 22, ratified in 1951. Section 1, no person shall be elected to office of the president more than twice, and no person who has held the office for president or acted as president for more than 2 years of a term to which some other person was elected. The president shall be selected to the office of presidency more than once. But this article shall not apply to any person holding the office of the president when the article was proposed by Congress, and shall not prevent any person who may be holding the office of presidency or acting as presidency during the term within which this article becomes operative from holding the office of presidents or acting as president during the remainder of such term. Section 2. This article shall be inoperative unless it shall have been ratified as an amendment to the Constitution by the legislators of 3/4 of several states within 7 years from the date of the submission to the states by Congress. Although the people of the United States has expressed their will by electing Franklin Delano Roosevelt to enforce successive elections in the aftermath of Roosevelt's term in office, many Americans began to have second thoughts about the wisdom of allowing presidents to exceed what had previously been the two-term tradition set by George Washington. By the terms of the 22nd Amendment, presidents are limited to 2 terms, or if they have served at least 2 years of the previous president's term, to 1 term. Americans continue to disagree on whether term limits, either in the executive or legislative branches, are consistent with democratic governance, and that there have been occasionally attempts to repeal the 22nd Amendment, although none has come close to Article 23. Section 1, the district constituting the seat of the government of the United States shall appoint in such a manner as the Congress may direct a number of electors of the president and vice president equal to the whole number of the senators and representatives in Congress to which the district would be entitled if it were a state, but in no event more than at least populous state. They shall be in addition to those appointed by the states, but they shall be considered for purposes of the election of president and vice president to be electors appointed by state, and they shall meet in the district and perform such duties provided by the 12th article of the amendments. Section 2. Congress shall have the power to enforce this article by appropriate legislature. The District of Columbia seat of the nation's government has always occupied a peculiar place within our federal system. The Constitution empowers Congress to designate a territory not exceeding 10 miles square as the nation's capital, but specifically intended that the federal district will not be within the boundaries or jurisdiction of any particular state thereof. Therefore, while the federal government exercises much of the government's enormous power within the District of Columbia, the territory has been denied voting representatives into Congress. This and until such passage as 23rd Amendment, its residents were denied the right to vote in the presidential election. By the terms of the 23rd Amendment, the residents of the District of Columbia were entitled to vote for the president presidential electors, with the number of electors representing the district equal to the number of senators and representatives that the state district would have if its whole were if it were a state, on the basis of its present population means 3 electors. Amendment 24, 1964. Section 1, the right of the citizen of the United States to vote in any primary or other election, the president or vice president, for electors for president or vice president, or for senators or for representatives in Congress shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or any state by reason of failure to pay any poll tax or other tax. Section 2, Congress shall have powers to enforce the articles by appropriate legislation. Although the 14th and 15th Amendments were intended to ensure African Americans had the right to vote, the imposition of a poll tax, a fee the citizens had to pay to the state or locality if they wished to vote, was a common device by which states, particularly those in the Southern, prevented low-income voters who were often predominantly African American from voting. The 24th Amendment explicitly prohibits the imposition to tax as a condition for voting. The amendment does not say anything about the use of poll tax in the state election, but soon after the passage of the 24th Amendment, the Supreme Court cited the Equal Protection Clause on the 14th Amendment, ruled that it was unconstitutional for states to require the payment of poll tax as a condition of voting in the state's election. 25, let's go to 25. Oh, this is a good one. Section 1, in the case of the removal of the president from the office or of his death or resignation, the vice president shall become president. Section 2, whereas whenever there is a vacancy in the office of vice presidency, the president shall nominate a vice president who shall take office upon confirmation by a majority vote of both houses of Congress. Section 3, the president, whenever the president transmits to the president pro tem of the Senate and the Speaker of the House of the Representatives his written declaration that he is unable to discharge the powers and duties of the office, and until he transmits to them in a written declaration contrary such powers, duties shall be designated by the vice president and acting president. Whenever the vice president or a majority of either the principal officers of the executive departments or of such other bodies of Congress may, by law, transmit to the president pro tempore of the Senate and the Speaker of the House of Representatives their written declaration that the president is unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office, the vice president shall immediately assume the powers and duties of the office as acting president. Thereafter, when the president transmits to the president pro tem of the Senate and the Speaker of the House of Representatives his written declaration that no inability exists, he shall resume the powers and duties of his office unless the president, vice president, or in the majority of either the principal of officers of the executive department or of such other bodies as Congress may by law provide transmit within 4 days to the President pro tem, Senate, and Speaker of the House of Representatives their written declaration that the President is unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office. Thereupon, Congress shall decide the issue, assembling within 48 hours for the purpose of not, if not in session, if Congress within 21 days thereafter receipt of the letter written declaration or in the Congress is not in session within 21 days after Congress is required to assemble, determines by 2/3 vote, both houses, that the president is unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office. The vice president shall continue to discharge the same as acting president. Otherwise, the president shall resume powers and duties of his office. Okay, here's a brief explanation. Although the 20th Amendment deals in part with the issue of the presidential succession, the 25th Amendment provides more detailed description on how Congress should proceed in the event of the death or removal of president or vice president, or in the case of temporary disability of the president. For example, if the president falls seriously ill and undergoes an operation and is not able for a period of time to exercise the duties of his office. Eight American presidents have died in the office, and one has resigned. And there have been several occasions when a president has been temporarily disabled. For example, when Ronald Reagan was wounded by a would-be assassin bullet in 1985, he transferred power to his vice president, George H.W. Bush, while he was hospitalized. The amendment also deals with the delicate questions of how to deal with the disability of the president when the president himself is not willing to declare such a disability. For example, in 1918, President Woodrow Wilson suffered a stroke, and many believed that his disability prevented from his carrying out of duties of his office effectively. But there were no means by which to resolve the issue of the 26th Amendment stipulates that Congress may, if 2/3 of the members of both houses agree, provide written declaration that the president is disabled and therefore transfer power to the vice president. Amendment 26 ratified in the right of Section 1, the right of citizens of the United States who are 18 years of age or older to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of age. Section 2, the Congress shall have power to enforce the article by appropriate legislature. In brief synopsis, it is no accident that this amendment giving citizens 18 years or older the right to vote was passed at the height of the Vietnam War. Some of the reasoning behind the amendment was that if young men and women were old enough to serve and risk their lives in the military, then they should be given the right to vote. And finally, the 27th Amendment, which is the very last amendment. Yay! They're supposed to be 28, but they didn't ratify it. The 3/4 of the states didn't ratify it soon enough, so that's why there is no 28th. And that was going to be women's equal rights. No law varying or article or amendment 27, 1992. No law varying the compensation for the services of the senators and representatives shall take effect until an election of the representatives shall have been interviewed. 27th Amendment was originally part of the package of the 12th Amendments submitted to the states by the first Congress in 1789, but it was not ratified at that time. Aggregation to the reconsidered the amendments resurfaced in the 1980s as the public became increasingly unhappy over a series of pay raises that members of the Congress awarded themselves. The provision of this amendment make it impossible for members of Congress to put into effect increasing their salaries before the session in which they are serving has ended. By this mechanism, members of the Congress are seeking re-election have to justify the proposed increasing in the salary to voters during their re-election campaigns. No law varying the compensation, no law varying the compensation pay for the services of the senators or representatives shall take effect until an election of the so it has to wait for an election before they can act. And I want to thank y'all for listening to my reading of the 11 through 27 amendments. And hopefully you can join me for more. Next, I'm either going to do the selection of the Federalist Papers in this book. Let's see if I know which one they are. Federalist 10, 51, 78. It's all Revolution of the Original American Constitution. Thank you. That's a good book. It gives you a brief rundown. Gives you a brief rundown also of different things that mean different things. Thank you for your time. Like, share, follow, and read. Please remember, you are loved no matter what you do. Thank you very much.